All the while when I was playing through Baldur's Gate 3, I kept asking myself one question. Why is this Baldur's Gate 3 and not just something else? Baldur's Gate 3 is the long-term, sort of long-awaited proper sequel to the Baldur's Gate series of Dungeons & Dragons licensed computer games. Fashion your character and partake in an epic adventure full of daring things and daring endure other things whilst you wrestle with a doomsday device lodged in your brain and an even bigger brain problem to worry about later on. In whatever regard that this game might be considered a sequel, its namesake, in a very ironic and fitting comparison to the other games of the series, has very little to do with Baldur's Gate, a large city within the game's setting, and sees you handling more situations outside of it for 2/3 of the game's runtime. To those experienced with the older titles, this one really has minimal connection at best with them. This little chat about the game is going to be filled with spoilers, so take your warning now about it. If you're looking to play this game, don't listen to me before you do, unless you're skeptical about it. Though I'll sum it up laconically here to give you a quick perspective on the rest of the discussion. Baldur's Gate 3 forces you to play along. What might sound like a loaded opening statement is one I believe in wholeheartedly for this game. Your actions and choices in terms of its story and world are just non-existent, or at best, not important. The entire story plot is about you having an illithid tadpole in your head all the time. It's set to burst, and when it does, you're going to become a mind flayer and lose your self-control. Sucks. For whatever reason, though it's revealed later why, you haven't yet bursted into one. Despite being well past your due date, you trek out with the primary goal of trying to get this thing out of your head before it makes you into a higher intellectual Neanderthal. And you meet others along the way that are in the same predicament. Along the journey, beyond all the others not involved in your situation, you will at some point, usually earlier than later, find this device that looks like a fucking D20 die. I'm almost convinced this was on purpose, I'll explain later why. And this device protects you from mind intrusions of some sort, and a whole whack of other things later explained. As you trek across the land, either learning and dealing with other people's problems or ignoring them outright, but curiosity in a first-time playthrough usually coaxing you into wanting to explore it more, you'll come to understand more about why you have the tadpole that you do and how it relates to the others and some other big story reveal things. The reveals are not that interesting. You design your own character from a myriad of choices, ranging from classes, background, race, and other things. Being that you are this person for the entire game, it makes the selection an important one to you personally, but your own character feels like a hollow shell. Whatever personality you try to instill into them falls flat because all situations are already preordained. You have a selection of whom you want to be when you start the game. By default, you can make your own character with limited background opportunity, but if you would so choose, you can pick one of the 6 pre-made characters that come with their own established histories and roles that you can play along with yourself now. And I mean, that's interesting. It was already done in original Sin 2, I guess, so they just recycled that here, but it's cooler to see than not. Though a huge glaring issue with it is if you play as one of the origin characters, as they're called, you eliminate like all of their voice dialogue and responses because now they just take up the mantle of the main character. So you're just slapping a coat of new paint onto the same position, onto the same problem. It actually makes the characters less engaging to play than to interact with on the side because it's all just the same blank slate shit now. At almost all points of the story, you can actually use any number of your party to facilitate dialogue, so you can effectively remove their personal input and responses if you so choose. It's all kind of awkward, really. What makes the origin characters more interesting, at the least, is compared to your personal character, whom can be whatever you desire, is that you don't feel like some husk that has no sense being where they are. Like, wow, I'm a drow from the Underdark. Why the fuck did I get nabbed by mind flayers exactly? Was it an underground colony of them that did this to me? You're not told. It seems like many were taken from surface regions, not from underground. By default, many of the races you can choose give you the additional background of being from Baldur's Gate. This virtually has no impact on anything in the story. Even when you reach Baldur's Gate and you tell the guards, "Hey, I live here," they don't care. You have to go through the same lame shit as anyone else, because the DM wants you to. So it really just does not matter who or what you are, it's all the same. The only real exception to this rule is a particular origin character that was later added, the Dark Urge. Well, they're just about the only exclusive and invoking cast you can find in your party. And it has to be the main character's role. They can't be a side character.
You always take on such terrifying foes.
Baldur's Gate 3 tries to sell you the experience of playing Dungeons & Dragons. You might look at it and say, well, duh, why wouldn't it be doing that? It's licensed under D&D to begin with, but that's not at all what I think is the appropriate angle to look at it from. There wasn't really a time where I played the original Baldur's Gate and I said, man, I could be doing this with the tabletop variety of D&D instead of this computer game interpretation of it. I was engrossed and enjoying what I had in front of me to begin with. But it feels like much more the forced case for Baldur's Gate 3 because of how it tries to emphasize all that you're doing. Every character you journey with is a superhero in some regard. All of the main characters of other factions and groups are heavily emphasized to be over the top with their own super special powers you don't have. You have to end up saving the world or destroying it. And I mean, that's all kind of typical fantasy game stuff to begin with, really, but it's all done under this guise that you yourself will hopefully go out, buy up the 5th edition rulebook, and begin playing your own little tabletop adventures with your friends that you, I guess, presumably played through the game with already. The old Baldur's Gate games were interesting because the engine was advanced enough in the late 90s and early 2000s to let you play it fully all the way through in multiplayer with drop-in and drop-out support. That was insane back then, and awesome. Now it's mundane. So what is it accomplishing here? It's marketing, that's all. In fact, it's frustrating. There's a lot of bugs and glitches with joining parties in this game. Well, you better go get yourself some D20s and whip out the character sheets, boys, because we're going big tonight. The mechanics for the game is what I think many would consider to be pretty nominal and understood by this point in the computer role-playing game genre. If you played any of the Divinity Original Sin games, it handles exceedingly close to those. No due in part to being made of the same engine by the same developers, of course. You move about isometric style, commanding a party of 1 to 4 members where combat begins a turn-based initiative order-led combat sequence. You have a movement bar that you can use to cover distance, options to move about differently. You get 2 distinctions of actions to take every turn, a green dot, which signifies an action. You attack with this one, you use spells with it, you do most of your big-name moves with it. On the other side, you have bonus actions, which cover a more loose secondary and supportive list of actions that will assist in different ways. It can be used in place for certain spells, letting you combine more options. You can also use it to push someone, you can use it to drink a potion from your bag, use to jump. Some classes get more uses out of it than others. There's an interesting usage of action economy between the green and orange button. Reactions, which is an action that is used when something occurs in response to another, is its own subsection of it. Modal passives that can be activated in either preparation or some reactionary situation, such as activating non-lethal mode. There is a good amount of game going on here. It stands on its own. Though I can't help but feel it was the predecessors of Original Sin that really helped solidify it, and not so much the previous games or even tabletop editions of the said engine. It certainly tries to establish this as Dungeons & Dragons though, with all the dice everywhere. And oh boy, the dice, yeah, it sure does happen a lot. Hey, did you know in Dungeons & Dragons you roll dice to make things happen? The whole game is ran around this premise. You roll a die and you read off a number and it determines how well or how poorly an event or action unfolds, and boy, is it always there, it's always happening, and you always have to click every single time to make a little virtual die RNG machine roll in front of your face and just never fucking stops, and you just keep rolling about every 30 seconds because it needs to remind you that this is Dungeons & Dragons, and in Dungeons & Dragons you roll dice and it just never ends. I'm willing to bet at least 5% of the screen time for this game is spent on dice rolls, and that may not sound like much, but if you consider what is prophesized as an 80-hour-long game, then 5% of that is 4 hours worth. Trust me, 4 hours of looking at dice does not actually seem out of the realm of possibility here. Maybe it's less, but I argue it's still too much, and I'm not even counting all the time you hear the fucking little dice sound effect going off anytime someone has to make a saving throw or some shit. This sound effect will just rattle in your brain. It gets irritating quick. Like, I don't understand. Why do I have to click to see the die roll on the screen? I mean, I get it. It's gonna be a random number, and it's like, oh, critical success, oh, critical failure, dude. You failed, bro. You fucking failed. It's like... Can you just automate it for me? I know it's gonna happen anyways. Why do I have to fucking watch this die spin around? Please, I'm done with it, man. I got done with it by like the 10th time it happened, man. Though, still, the biggest gripe is the storyline. It's not even really there. It's a forced sequence of events that you're allowed to sort of partially influence. Though no matter what it is you do, at the end of the game, you're told off by the big bad that everything you did was preordained and planned for. It's like, wow, you're so silly, you're just a pawn the whole time, ooh, wow, incredible. Centric to how the game starts, you need to get this tadpole out of you, but you're never once able to. Never once. And everyone around you is like, man, we need to get this tadpole out of our brains. But you can't. You literally go and try about 8 different ways of getting it out of your brain, and it fails each and every time because someone doesn't want that to happen and is a big baby and needs their rattle. So all this illusion of choice just grates on you the entire way through the game because you were bereft of choice from the start. Like, well, why bother? My first time through, I accidentally committed genocide at the Druid Grove. I'm not joking. And then I killed a bunch of goblins and told off some gif and bugged out a boss fight. And then I realized, like, why is my first answer to everything is just to kill it? And the answer I got back was because everyone else is out to kill you. Seriously, the most mundane or partially threatening words you can spit out at someone else almost always responds in kind to you, and then a fight ensues. I didn't mean to kill half the people I did in the game, but then later I just said fuck it because it's the only real empowering choice I get. Otherwise, I have to subject myself to the bullshit that they want me to do, that they're going to make me do anyways, so I mean, I just lose, you know? I mean, and then I get looped around, and like, I have to jump around the map 6 times over doing some stupid fetch quest to reveal the conspiracy of someone I already killed who was about to commit. It's just like, okay, why? I just don't get it. It was just so telling that at the halfway point of the game, I didn't want to talk to a single person, not ever again. I was just done with it. But the game just wouldn't let me have that. And then, you know, you go to sleep, it's like, oh, some random bard girl comes and wants to sleep in my camp tonight. I'm like, no, please go away. And then it's like, haha, it doesn't matter, she's gonna stick around regardless. And then 5 seconds later, she's like, she's dead. And so instead now it's like you knock her out before she goes into this scene. And then if she's not even available, or if she's dead before, it's literally just another bard girl takes her place and then dies anyways. You don't get a fucking choice in any of this. So why are you forcing me along with this? It's like, this is a forced narrative. There's no other way to look at it. I walked through the realm as a Githyanki, and never did it feel like I was being a genuine one of my own kind. Even with the presented racial options, it just felt like I was being fake. Like I wasn't really who I was supposed to be. I'm just a fucking facsimile. And then you come across this absolute absurdity of it, which is me stating I'm like a sorcerer bard Githyanki, and it just all starts falling apart. Like who am I? I have no identity. I'm non-existent. And there's nothing to relate to me here. There's nothing cohesive about me at all.
Who on earth do you think you are?
Meanwhile, the origin characters beside me at least do have their like own motivations and desires, albeit it's kind of lackluster and lopsided a lot of the time. The relationships with these characters it's just vanity. Their issues, their wants, and their hates and things completely irrelevant to me at all hours of the day, really. It's like, it was only on the precipice of one threatening to leave my group did I felt compelled enough to care about their problem and relocate my interests to want to see it done and have them remain. Yet, I only ask myself, did I do that because I am concerned about them and what might become of them? Should I ignore the needs of theirs? Or am I just not wanting to lose their stats? Like, anyone can be rebuilt in any desired pattern at your leisure. Their uniqueness is minimal most of the time. You can go back to camp and make a random blank slate character and just get back all their stats. And I grudgingly admit, I only recruited one of the characters later on simply because I was just slightly more piqued in curiosity about them compared to my starting cohorts that I was wrestled with to be tied to from the start anyways. So it's, you know, it's like, what's the point? I mean, that's like a philosophical fundamental issue to be asking yourself. You know, it's like, what is the worth of this one person to me? Is it an emotional investment, or is it a you have a good stat line and I want you in my party investment? You know, I mean, even the game recommends that you make a balanced party. Like, who are you to me? Well, and then speaking of then relations, I mean, romantic interests are entirely one-sided here. You are the main character. You know, and you got these approval ratings. If your approval rating with the other characters gets high enough, you're liable to be fucked by them. The essence, though, is that they can fall for you in literal minutes if you just say the right thing here and there, making some of them to be some of the easiest catches in history. And that makes them very boring. It was sort of telling when, on my canonical third day in our adventure, that Lizelle starts talking about my fucking stank and how much she's into it. She wants to have sex, man. She really wants it. Now. But at least she asks, like, if you want it in return, so there's that at least. There's a partial level of courtesy, I suppose. I taught that consideration, though, is that all romantic interests are willing to intercourse with you regardless of your gender or your species. Which strikes me as sort of shallow in and of itself. One might say it's a judgment of character over genetics. You know, it's noble, but it's the pure fact that my entire troupe of characters, no matter whom or what they are all suddenly down to fuck anything in their path because they're, what, just monster horny all the time? None of them have any real distinct preference in mind once you start passively wooing over their minds by selecting the correct dialogue choices. It's a romance sim where, unless you deliberately start choosing poor options against them in regards to their personalities against you, you know, you lose the game. It's like, otherwise you're liable to just have your pants off the next time you long rest. You are unconditionally always attractive no matter what has happened to you. And I mean, you can lose your eye, you know? Like, it's just, it's like this just disgusting mess now. And they're just like, I'm down to fuck, you know. I also find it weird a Gith would fuck anything that's not a Gith. I mean, a Drow, I sort of get it. That's more of a societal dominance thing than a mutual interest bit. But boy, will Lizelle be sure to mention about how she doesn't need someone to lay eggs with. They just get told by their god mommy that there's eggs to be hatched, and then she can just enjoy plain old sex. She doesn't need birth control. Alleviation of responsibility is awesome. It's bizarrely chaotically pure, but this is also just plain power fantasizing. It doesn't feel genuine in the slightest. It feels like all the romance options were just there because someone fantasized about it in real life, and they're like, well, this is my chance to write about it in a video game, I guess. With the en masse of horndogging here, when you have a big celebration at your camp eventually in the story, the game pushes you along to have sex with someone else. Or not exactly have sex, but it's one of the two options only available when you do go with someone. And with some characters, it's the only option available, actually. And if you haven't wooed someone strongly enough by now, then you dejectedly get made to sleep alone, and the game really makes you well and aware that you are someone who is sleeping alone and not with someone else this evening. It's this obtusedly sassy narration that just tells you, hey, even though you didn't get to have sex, you sure do feel uplifted by what you've accomplished this day. So don't sweat. But also, you didn't have sex. Even fucking Withers will comment and be like, oh, thou didn't get to fuck anyone. Well. And it's like, does any of that matter, bro? And he's like, no, not really, I guess, but I'll still mention it. I'm like, cool, that's really neat of you, dude. Awesome. Even a goddamn incubus will proposition you, but will at least offer themselves up as a woman if need be, because, you know, they want to have proper bisexual sex with you. Then you get forced into some stupid-ass conversation with Chihiro, who just tries to act all uppity on your shit, and a whole bunch of other people you don't want to deal with. Speaking of the old cast, of which you encounter a good handful of them in the third act of the game, none of them have their original voice cast from the previous installments, and I don't understand why. You might first mistake when you hear Chihiro's voice as her original actress's, but it's not. This one doesn't surprise me so much because she did not reprise her role in Siege of Dragonspear, but then you meet Viconia, Servok, and Minsk. I didn't actually recruit Minsk ever, and none of their original talent return, which I know is bullshit because when development of Baldur's Gate 3 started, Siege of Dragonspear was released only a few years prior to it, so they very much could have gotten them. These actors were all still active by that time as well. Even Jim Cummings! And that fucker is in his 70s now! Finding Servok and not hearing Kevin Michael Richardson's deep voice literally killed me on the spot. Viconia not having Grey Delisle almost made me Alt F4 out of the fucking game. It's no wonder I had a dark urge to kill all these characters. Speaking of, the dark urge is a particular character that needs discussion all on his own. The dark urge, without going too much into it, is a ball spawn of some variety. There's more to them than that, but this is the only proper story hook and call out to the old games that actually has any tangibility to it. Your character has a predetermined background whilst also being an empty shell, and there's actually a lot of nuance to it in this precise example. It's all extremely bizarre why. This character in particular was not the central focus of the story. It's actually mind-boggling. If the game was more centered around the idea that you're the spawn of a god, just like it was in the previous titles, hint hint, then I would have been much more satisfied by it than over some stupid mind flare, eldritch, horror-esque conspiracy shit. It's sort of funny, but the concept of gods being the biggest concern is very typical in the D&D world-verse. Yet they take a huge backseat to everything here, and only really become relevant when Act 3 starts up. Like, yeah, even sort of, though, there's big things about, like, Shar and Saloon and stuff, but, they're big things that you can just ignore entirely, and I did ignore entirely, actually. So they don't take much presence to begin with. Yeah, you're fighting one of the avatars of one of the gods, and that's about as focused as it ever gets. Even the situation about Baal kind of doesn't hold a candle to it. When you compare the two. It's just like... In fact, something I kind of stumbled upon was that when you remove the story, the game actually feels really fun. Boiling down all of the choices of consequence down into their base elements of you get X, but you lose Y, makes it a very interesting and fun game theory situation where you want to try all sorts of odd combinations or min-max as hard as you can to discover new possibilities and interactions you might have not thought of. I mean, it's possible to make big, hard bosses paralyzed for rounds on end, whilst your warrior beats them up. In a lot of games, they simply would just have, like, pure immunity to it, or something. Some enemies, bosses included, you can literally just push them off into a chasm of death. And this is a completely legitimate strategy. When you just ignore whatever it is the plot is trying to tell you and simply enjoy the act of playing the statistics out, I would wholeheartedly recommend playing this. A large part of Baldur's Gate 3's reputation really was held onto by the fact that the player base quoted it as being a good game in this day and age. Like, many clamored about how it wasn't something that was prone to the rapture of a lot of... I had this big bit made about the whole player reaction and dev reaction stuff, but yeah, honestly, I think I don't need to go over any of that, really. You can just watch this video and then just see the discourse that came from it. I think that does the job better than I could. And I'm not denigrating the quality of the product we received. It is good. It's not perfect, but seldom is anything perfect. It works well enough, mostly, but it must be some odd, cryptic, twisted spectacle for people to yell on about how the game does no wrong to anyone because of, well, how well behaved it is in this regard or something. It's earned that reputation, yes, and it just makes me wonder if it was all a distraction from other aspects. But I mean, this is also a game that did the whole, early access thing. So I mean, for a long time, people weren't even playing like a completed game, and they were still raving about it. I mean, is that good? Is that bad? I think it's bad, personally. There was a time where, as I was playing through, I decided to take a quick break, and I booted up the original Baldur's Gate just to kind of play it and see if I would get some sort of elucidation from it, right? And I noticed as I was playing it and enjoying it that really there wasn't a comparison to be made. These are not the same games, Like, I can't look at it and say, Baldur's Gate 3 has come a long way since Baldur's Gate 1, because they may as well just not even be the same games. This is just Divinity Original Sin 3. I don't know what else to say. Despite the game having been out for what I would consider a pretty long time by now, it was released about a year ago from this video's point, though you could play early access for like, oh man, like what was it, like 2 years? 3 now? It's actually still riddled with a lot of bugs and imperfections littered about. Some are not overtly terrible, some are actually straight up game ending. And it's really depressing when it bugs out on your honor playthrough. The kind with only the single save file, and now you're just screwed. Yeah. For my first playthrough, my game was marred by this horrific issue where all actions took about a second for them to register and be processed when I reached the third act of the game. I wasn't quite sure if this was something common or not, so I tried looking up information, see what other people said, and it was apparently related to this thing or other thing that I couldn't really control in my past of my actions, and it's now permanently corrupted my save file with no hope to fix it. So I literally had to play as if my CPU was killing itself for the last 10 to 20 hours of the game, and man, did it suck. Of weird note was when I was researching a bit more into the game, I came across the news pages that Larian, the developers, released as the early access patches were coming out, and they make these weird comparisons to, like, original Sin 2 for some reason, and I don't really get why. And then I really got it. It's because they have nothing else to stand on, and it's really just a glorified original Sin 3 that they made. I mean, just look at it. It was all planned from the start. Like, why else would they even bother comparing two separate franchises like this, then? I know it must seem like a minor note, but, you know, when the developers cling to this facet of it, it's just like that one game that came out, right? And at the bottom of the banner, it always just kept saying, "From the makers of FTL." It's like, don't do that. That is clingy. I think it's unprofessional. I think it's really unappealing. With a script of over 2 million words. Yeah, I knew of a game that did it better with half that number. So why do I say this is all just a sub-level marketing ploy for D&D? Well, think about it. You're led through this engrossing storyline of triumphantly powerful and plot-endowed, enhanced individuals that break many norms, all for the comfort of being more fully capable than anyone else they come across. A vampire that can walk in the daylight, a prophesized cleric whom is not told of it, a Gith Yankee that doesn't immediately just kill you outright. That one really gets to me. The Yankee are brutal, but they're like moderately friendly in this for whatever reason. All of these individuals have psionic powers. Now they're bound by this power by a plot device MacGuffin that is collectively shielding them and fits in their pocket, but it's also controlling them. It's in the shape of a D20. Now, who is within this D20? A omnipotent individual that motions you along the storyline without your input or choice in the matter. That is invincible, that always shifts you back onto the path anytime you try to make a deviancy from it.
Your curiosity is
Shut up! The tadpoles are your plot armor. The characters you meet are the inventions of the DM. The Emperor is the DM. Baldur's Gate 3 is his campaign that he is railroading you on. All your choices are inconsequential because you will always end up at the same ending junction because the DM doesn't want you to go do other stuff. Or maybe he's just lazy. He wants his ending to be seen, to the point where even if you want to just say no to something, he won't let you unless it's exactly what he wants you to say no to. You can't let the tadpole eat your brain, you can't get it out of your brain, you can't tell him off because he won't just leave you anyways. God forbid you want to kill him. He orchestrates this all. I know he gets circumvented by that at the ending of the story, but that barely matters. And even if you take the route that usurps his position of Dungeon Master, he cries and rees the fuck out and pisses on you and leaves to go make his end boss even more powerful because he's a giant crybaby and you didn't appreciate the 4 waifus he made for this totally original module, guys. He is the biggest self-insert anybody could ever create. The narrative is a disempowering sex drive with the only emphasis on letting you bust a nut and pretending you're cool. To a fan of the original sequence of games, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment, Neverwinter Nights, it just makes me irritated and uncomfortable that my whole journey through the supposed 3rd installment was really just the lore of the 5e world just taking the piss on everything. I haven't even mentioned some of the most egregious story twists, and I'm very much looking yet again at the Emperor when I say these words. I mean, I think a great one is, you know, hey, you get to the ending of the game, and someone has to become a Mind Flayer, and it's like, the whole thing you were working against this entire time, literally up to this point, 70 hours worth, and your only choice is you become a Mind Flayer, someone else becomes a Mind Flayer, or the guy you just rescued becomes a Mind Flayer, and it's like, well, there's just not really an option here. There wasn't a choice then. Why did you pretend that there was going to be? It's so boring. I can see someone being contentious about what I've said, arguing that just because one half of the game wasn't satisfying, the other half was, so you should appreciate it for what it is. And I'm here to say, that's absolutely fucking stupid. I don't purchase a toaster for only one of the 2 elements to work. Yeah, I guess I should be damn thankful it toasts bread on one side at least, the whole of the sum here. Just because I like blasting nerds and playing around with funny class combinations and infinitely stealing from stores doesn't mean that the injustice of the shallow world I'm involved in, the lack of my choices really having any suitable consequence or impact, the linearity of the ending sequence, it doesn't excuse the other parts. Numbers can be fun, but the rest isn't. In fact, really, the whole story should have just been about you, the Dark Urge, dealing with your urge, and about whether or not you ascend to Baal's chosen status. And then the story should have concluded with you either fighting off the trio of the Death God, or bringing about a wave of slaughter to take over the Sword Coast. Both of those would have been infinitely more satisfying, more relatable, and within the realm of possibility. In fact, the storyline is even developed in such a way that it almost seems like that was the original intention or something. Because, I mean, look at it. When you reach the midway point of Act 2, it's not about the Mind Flayers anymore. It's about this cult that reveals something you don't quite understand, is led by an immortal being that derives from godly invocations and involvement. And then, at the end of the act, it's revealed that there's 3 would-be wannabe chosen ones who want to take over the world and fuck shit up, and that the Mind Flayer storyline was absolutely just a cop-out to let them go through with it all. But Mother Brain planned it all from the start somehow, and do you see how, if we just got rid of the Mind Flayers, the story would have worked entirely fine without them? Why were they required in the slightest? They weren't, and I don't know why. I don't know why they were there. It ruins the entire plot. Oh, but bro, what about the Gith Yankee prophecy? Hey, how about you make a different game about that then? Eh? Huh? No? Someone later in development really understood what the story needed. That was the Dark Urge. Honestly, I would really say that the main character should just be the Dark Urge and forget all these other choices. But by then, it was all too fucked to fix, so they shipped it. What a disappointment.